All right. So 4.5 talks about abusive head trauma. The standard for this one says I can describe causes, prevention, and consequences for abusive head trauma. So, our essential question is what consequences can be caused from abusive head trauma? Go ahead, pause, write this down, and then continue when you're ready. All right, abusive head trauma, also known as AHT for short. Abusive head trauma, including shaken baby syndrome, is a severe form of child abuse that results in brain injury. This is caused by violent shaking and or with blunt impact. So this can also be like dropping a child without necessarily shaking them. Okay. So the resulting injury can cause bleeding around the brain or on the inside back layer of the eyes. AHT often happens when a parent or caregiver becomes angry or frustrated because of the child's crying. So, I'm going to have you watch this video about abusive head trauma, and we'll come back afterward.
The American Academy of Pediatrics officially now calls it abusive head trauma. It really is the same thing as shaken baby syndrome, except that it's a little bit more broad. There's a lot of injuries, for example, where you can have an impact injury if a child gets hit over the head with a baseball bat by an adult. That's clearly an abusive head trauma, but it's not a shaken baby. So there's other ways to hurt a child that don't involve shaking. And I think as time has gone on, we've realized that what we thought was shaken baby syndrome, a lot of these children may be shaken, but a lot of other things happen. And so the word abusive head trauma gets away from this idea that we know exactly what the mechanism is and tries to focus on the fact that an adult, another person, hurt the child rather than exactly how that injury occurred. For in terms of what happens in an abusive head trauma, we don't usually know, except with the rare cases where people have been caught on nanny cam, abusing their children. Most of these are based on a clinical understanding. Some are based on confession. But what we think happens is an adult gets frustrated with the child and either shakes them and throws them, shakes them and impacts their head in some way. But usually what also happens is the children stop breathing. And so what we often see as one of the biggest problems is these children have a lack of oxygen to their brain. And so their injury is very diffuse. We were talking about the local injury and the diffuse injury. These are almost all diffuse injuries. And so outcome from abusive head trauma tends to be very poor. And if you match these children for their severity of injury, their age, some match of socioeconomic status, they do much worse than children with non-inflicted injuries of the same when all those issues are matched. And it's probably because of the severity of the injury, the diffuseness of the injury, and perhaps because once this has happened, caretakers don't always call for help right away.
Okay, so that's some more specifics of abusive head trauma. It's a little bit more broad than shaken baby syndrome, but it does include that. Okay. All right, so some prevention. Abusive head trauma is preventable by responding to infant crying appropriately. So, some ways to cope with crying. Some techniques for soothing an infant are touch, motion, and sound. A lot of times that's why you'll see people bouncing a baby and they'll be like, shh, and they'll be like walking around because you're holding the baby. That's touch. Motion is moving, and sound, the shh, can be soothing. Okay. If your coping threshold, how much a person can take of something for crying is reached and there's no one around to relieve you by taking the baby, put the crying baby down in its crib, close the door, and go do something to relieve the stress. Dance to loud music, vacuum, watch TV, check on the baby every 5 to 10 minutes. Okay? That way you're making sure the baby's like, okay. Like you're not just leaving them alone for hours, right? While you watch your favorite show. But like you're checking on the baby every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure they're okay. Okay? All right. So, those are some ways that we can prevent abusive head trauma. So, let's talk about some consequences. Nearly all victims of abusive head trauma suffer serious long term health consequences. Examples include vision problems, developmental delays, physical disabilities, hearing loss, and death. Okay? At least one of every 4 babies who experience abusive head trauma dies from this form of child abuse. Okay? Which is very sad, right? All right. I will see you in the next one.